All right, welcome back. I'm now being joined on the program by an investment banker to continue this discussion further. That's investment banker Johnson Chukwu. Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us on the program. First off, let me get your take on the warning by the IMF now that Nigeria might be heading for a recession. For you, that will be nothing new at all because most people had predicted that we might be heading for a recession when the GDP figures for the second quarter are released.
Well, it didn't come as a surprise to me because, like you rightly said, it was almost all of us have been expecting that the country would go into a recession by the time the second quarter GDP is announced. We saw a drop in first quarter by 0.36% in GDP, a contraction in GDP. And from all indications, looking at all the quantitative and qualitative factors, clearly the second quarter will end in negative growth. And what IMF even said, which is frightening, is that the Nigerian economy will contract by about 1.8% in 2016. And for me, for a country with a huge population where you already have high incidence on unemployment, a country that is experiencing high rate of inflation, and then you're also going through a contraction in economic performance, then that's actually more frightening because we're actually going to be facing a double whammy. High rate of inflation, high level of unemployment, those factors are not good for any economy.
Let us talk about the inflation now. Quite worrisome, 16.5% according to the Bureau of Statistics. No doubt very high, the highest in 10 years. Attention is now shifting to the Central Bank of Nigeria. I'm talking about especially the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank. What do you expect it to do? Because naturally what we have seen in the past is that when you have this kind of situation, what the MPC does is just to tighten. Do you expect the MPC to tighten this time, especially given the fact that, tightening might not even be in the interest of the country, might even harm the economy?
No, I don't expect the MPC to tighten. I mean, what is there to tighten? The banking system already has some liquidity constraints. So where will it be tightening? We don't have a liquidity overhang. The increase in inflation rate has nothing to do with excessive credit creation. It was particularly driven by structural deficiencies in the economy. The issue of a pass-through effect of the NAIRA devaluation, which what we all agitated for, the high cost of energy sources like kerosene and all the rest, and the high cost of food, imported food inflation. So these factors have nothing to do with the Monetary Policy Committee in terms of liquidity availability in the system.
So you will expect the monetary policy rates to remain the same, right?
Yes, yes. The monetary policy rate today, there's actually a disconnect between the monetary policy rate and current interest rates. The monetary policy rate is supposed to be the benchmark rate, but today we are seeing a Treasury bills rate. Today was about 17%. There's no linkage between the 17% open market operation offer that was sold today and a monetary policy rate of 12%. So because we have seen a sharp increase in inflation rate, that linkage between monetary policy rate and interest rate have completely been disconnected.
Let me get your take on the Naira, because I remember some time ago when, there was this debate over whether or not to devalue the Naira. You are one of those who, came out very optimistic that the decision the central bank took would no doubt help this country, and that whether we like it or not, that at some point we would definitely see the Naira stabilizing and probably gaining on the dollars. And, even some people went to the extent of suggesting that with the flexible exchange rate and without the peg, you could see the disappearance of the black market, that's the parallel market. But all of that has not happened. I remember I also spoke with you then. You also said we're going to see a massive inflow of Forex, but that has not happened so far. The Naira has continued to dip against the major currencies in the world, especially the dollar now. What exactly is wrong? Because the figure we are seeing now, it's quite scary. I mean, at some point, the Naira was exchanging for 375 to the dollar.
Well, it's not exactly what is wrong. What are the challenges that the economy is still facing that has led to continued depreciation of the Naira? One factor we have to recognize is that the further shortfall in production, or crude production, was not envisaged. I said we've seen a drastic reduction in production, in crude production, as a result of the Avengers, Niger Delta Avengers. So, in the first place, for us to stabilize the exchange rate at both the interbank market and the parallel market, there has to be enough supply to meet the current demand. And that supply at the onset will have to come from central bank, because the alternative sources of inflow that we are all expect to come up will take some time to mature. The other alternative sources of inflow, for instance, the foreign portfolio investors are still watching the economy. They are still watching for what we may call the price to see the rate at which the Naira will settle. And Naira is still going through a process of price formation. So it's only when we have some level of stability in exchange rate that the foreign portfolio investors begin to come back. Today, yield on Nigerian government instruments are quite attractive. But because we are still seeing fluctuations, and that fluctuation will only be addressed if the supply from CBN is sufficient at the onset to stabilize the exchange rate. And that will be achieved when the central bank has enough dollars supply. Unfortunately for us, we are witnessing a situation, like I mentioned earlier, where the crisis in the Niger Delta has constrained the earnings, foreign exchange earnings of the country. And that is the liquidity source that should ordinarily be used to stabilize the exchange rate. So until you have stability in the exchange rate, then some of the sources of inflows may not come immediately. But the good thing that we have taken a decision that has liberalized the market, that has created a window for those sources to come. It's just that we have not attained the conditionalities or the conditions that will make it, that will attract that inflow. Let's take, for instance, the issue of home remittances. Anybody who has foreign money outside the country and wants to bring it in, we certainly want to bring it in, because the exchange rate today is more reflective of the intrinsic value of the economy or the currency's capacity to earn foreign exchange. Unlike what you have artificially low exchange rate, that was no way reflective of the capacity of the economy. Again, by allowing Naira to adjust accordingly, according to demand and supply, we've eliminated the economic rent opportunity that was previously applicable, where people were motivated to get allocations at official rate and then turn around and trip it back into the system, and they enjoy huge spread, which was far more than what could get from a normal business activity. So I still strongly support the decision of the central bank to allow the Naira to float, because that's the only time we're going to have the chance to open up those windows of inflow. Earnings from non-oil export, home remittances, and inflows from foreign portfolio investors and foreign direct investors. So, irrespective of the fact that we're seeing depreciation of the Naira, but that is only going to be temporary. Ultimately, in the medium term, you're going to have more stability and possibly an appreciation.
I mean, you're quite right. There's no doubt at all that there isn't enough supply of dollars, and that's the forex, so to speak, even though it's dollars anyway. That's the major currency we exchange here. There isn't enough supply of forex, and that's the reason why the Naira has continued to perform badly against currencies like the dollars. But let me ask you this. When do you expect, for instance, to begin to see these massive inflows come in? Could you put a time frame to it?
It might be difficult to give a time frame. A couple of things have to fall into place. One, and like I mentioned, we need to quickly address the crisis in the Niger Delta so that Nigeria's oil crude production will improve. At $45 to $50 per barrel, remember the benchmark for the crude in the budget was about $38. Ordinarily, we should be talking about excess crude today. But unfortunately, whatever price variance we're enjoying is far more than offset by the negative volume variance we are suffering. So we are unable to earn enough to meet the budget obligations. If we can address the issues of the Avengers and multiple militant groups in the Niger Delta, and then go back to our projected production about 2.2 million barrels per day, we are likely going to have enough foreign exchange earnings being supplied from central bank to the interbank market to stabilize the exchange rate. If you have enough supply in the interbank market, even the parallel market will adjust accordingly. We've seen, until recently, we saw the parallel market at about 320. But because supply has dried up in the tobacco market, pressures have moved back to the parallel market and then bidding up the exchange rate at the parallel market.
What would you make of suggestions now by some of these BDCs operators saying, you know, if they were brought back into the system by the central bank, that that might possibly help matters and, you know, help resolve some of these supply problems? Do you share that view?
Well, I don't think that is realistic in the sense that, look, in the first place, central bank still today remains the sole supplier, the major supplier in the market, basically the market maker. And the BDCs are not likely going to bring in other sources of inflow. What they want is also to get allocation from central bank or to buy in the tobacco market, same volume of supply coming from central bank. If it was to say that the BDCs are going to attract their own autonomous sources of effects, then I will agree with them. But ultimately, when the central bank has the capacity to supply the market, that is when the central bank will say, okay, if we increase the outlets, which the BDCs will help to do by selling to the BDCs, so in that case, you are increasing the outlet for the sale of dollar, then automatically, because there are multiple supply sources, and then supply will almost meet up or possibly outstrip demand, then that's when the BDCs will be relevant in bringing down the exchange rate. But the key thing now we have is supply. The channels of delivery of the supply is not yet the problem. That will become important when the supply is sufficient to meet demand.
In your view now, how bad can things get with the exchange rate before they get better?
Well, it depends on what resource the central bank has and to their willingness to intervene. If the central bank has a reasonably good war chest, and the central bank comes to the interbank market, for instance, and offer $100 million, you're going to see NAIRA appreciate in all the market segments. But if there's no supply, and we're talking of $300,000 trade in a day, then pressure will continue to move to the parallel market. And because the parallel market is a very shallow market, then it cannot say exactly how far the NAIRA will depreciate before it begins to appreciate. But if we have instability, if we have uncertainty in the exchange rate, it will further delay the arrival or the return of foreign portfolio investors because they want to watch and see that NAIRA's depreciation has plateaued and that coming in, when they want to take out the money, they're not going to suffer more depreciation. So I think the onus is on the central bank, depending on their capacity, their watches, like I mentioned earlier, to meet the demand demand in the market. That will determine to what extent we're going to see the depreciation. But right now, it is the central bank that is the market maker. I just hope that on the federal government side, they will address the bottleneck or the constraints that we have in terms of foreign exchange earnings. And that will come from resolving the crisis in the Niger Delta.
The government has made it clear that it just might be difficult for it to implement the budget. When that budget, of course, was passed, we all hailed it a 6 trillion naira budget, unprecedented in this country. But unfortunately, we're beginning to see that it will be difficult to implement the budget because of the revenue shortfall we are seeing now. And of course, no thanks, as you mentioned, to what is going on in the Niger Delta region of the country. So in your estimation now, do you think we're likely, because I mean, whether you like it or not, the first half of the year is gone. Do you think we're likely going to see a 50% implementation of this budget?
Well, I strongly doubt whether we're going to see 50-60% implementation of the budget. Today, the foreign exchange earnings of the country is quite weak. The economy is going into a recession, and the issues in the Niger Delta has not been addressed. And I don't know how quickly that will be addressed. If that is not quickly addressed, we are running out of time. And it then means that if it's addressed towards the tail end of this year, it might be difficult for us to have a reasonable percentage of implementation of the budget. The recurrent expenditure portion of the budget is ongoing. So for me, I do not consider that as a parameter for measuring the performance of the implementation of the budget. The critical thing is that to what extent is the government able to generate enough revenue to meet capital expenditure projections, budget? If the capital expenditure budget is not implemented, it's as good as saying the budget was largely unimplemented, because the aspect that has to do with recurrent expenditure, which is payment of salaries, overheads, are certainly going on and do not necessarily contribute to building the capital, the asset base of the economy, or building the infrastructure that we need to catalyze economic development and growth. So, unfortunately, the implementation of the capital expenditure is more discretionary than the recurrent expenditure budget, because it will only be implemented if the government has met its recurrent expenditure obligations.
And of course, talking about that, the crisis in the Niger Delta region, what do you think will be the best approach for the government to adopt in resolving that problem there, so that all these attacks can stop?
Well, for me, I think it has to be a two-pronged approach. We have to have the carrot and we have to have the stick. The key thing that's happening in Niger Delta is that the inhabitants of Niger Delta feel that they have nothing to lose by disrupting oil production in their localities. Simple reason that they are not enjoying, they can't link their welfare to the proceeds of crude being exported from their localities. And that is the crux of the matter. And that's why they are, even those who are not involved in militancy are nonchalant in protecting the national assets. I think we must, as a government, as a people, establish a direct linkage between the resources being mined from their background and their welfare. If you go to those localities, you'll be shocked. A lot of them do not have power supply. They do not have potable water. They do not have roads. And then millions are being mined at their backyard. And then when they see people who are bridging those pipelines or burning those manifolds, they do not have any compelling reason to stop them or even report, because for them, they don't have any direct benefit of oil being produced from their localities. It's only when we establish that share of heart that we can now work with the locals to police the Niger Delta. So, and then those who are the misfits are the ones that the government will now take out by means of force. So we need to have both approaches, encourage those who are living in those areas to have a sense of ownership of the assets being extracted from their localities. And then they will help you to police those who are bent on disrupting the flow of oil.
And finally, let me just ask you what your medium to long-term view of the economy would be. You think, in the medium to long term that things might just rebound?
Well, in the short term, and the short term now, I'm talking of towards before the end of in the next 6 months. I think the economy may worsen, and if you look at the IMF projections, the decline, the contraction in the GDP will actually worsen as the quarters progress. I think the economy will worsen, but it all depends on the kind of policy response the federal government comes up with. I think a lot now depends on how the fiscal authorities respond to the current situation. But I do not see any turnaround in the next 3 months. But subsequently, if we respond appropriately, probably by the first quarter of next year, we should begin to see some level of recoveries.
All right, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us on the program as always, and thank you very much for your contributions. Well, that's it on the program. If you want to watch it again, it's simple. Just go to our website, tv360nigeria.com. You'll find this video and lots more there. You can also watch us on YouTube by subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/TV360Nigeria. Do subscribe to get the latest videos and updates. You can join us on Google Plus at TV360Nigeria, or just like us on Facebook. The address is facebook.com/TV360online. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at TV360Online. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.